Welcome into the Gramlich and McLean podcast presented by Ingles, the official supermarket of Gramlich and McLean. We continue our After Further Review series today with Syracuse. The Syracuse Orange that won 10 games, had an incredible season, upset Miami to upset everything in the ACC. We talk about all of that with the Syracuse insider, Brent Axe. What a name, by the way. At Brent Axe Media on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. He writes for Syracuse.com and he does so much more. He covers everything you need to know about Syracuse. So we're excited to dive into this season for the Cuse with Brent Axe. I am wearing my rowback. If you didn't notice, may not be having a great hair day, so just threw on that. Use our code GMPOD for 20% off. Go check out what they've got going on at rowback.com. And then, as you guys know, we could not do this without Ingles, who is our presenting sponsor, who does so much for us with this show. So make sure you guys frequent Ingles just like we do. Get ready. I can't believe we're almost there, but get ready for some Valentine's Day. Maybe get ready for what you're going to get your significant other. They've got great cakes and pastries and all sorts of good stuff there, flowers, balloons, etc. So get ready for that holiday coming up with Ingles. So let's get to a quick message from our friends over at Ingles, and then we will get to Brent Axe.
Did you know that Ingles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Axeman, welcome back to the podcast, brother. It is great to see you. And it was an orange year, I think, for all of us. We were all excited. We all got to take plenty of baths and get washed. It's great to see you. Syracuse, heck of a year, man. What'd you think of it? Just kind of broad picture here.
Yeah, no one more thankful for 10 wins this year than Mrs. Fran Brown, of course. Fran was walking around the house having not showered. Now, here's my question. If they lost the bowl game, does he go like the entire offseason? How does that work? Right?
Yeah. Thank God he didn't.
But what you just said there, Mac, winners get washed, dart, all these things that Fran did to connect with the fan base. Look, winning 10 games helps, and having a record-setting quarterback helps, as we're going to discuss here. But to see the enthusiasm from the fan base, not only for a winning product, but just for football itself, believing in the coach and feeling like they were part of it. I mean, fans around here can recite dart in their sleep, detailed, accountable, relentless, and tough. Like they apply it to their everyday life. I got people texting me all the time saying, that's not dart. So the effect that Fran Brown had in 1 year just goes to show you in the portal era, in the NIL era, there's a lot of, belly aching about it, but somebody can come in here and not only do that, but good old fashioned recruiting. Nobody had a bigger recruiting class than Syracuse. And in just 3 weeks last year, when Fran took over, which I believe we talked about last time I was on, but the guy's around for 3 weeks in a recruiting class in December and brings in a number of players that got on the field this year, right? So I think that's encouraging. It's not just go pluck the highest priced talent out of the portal. This guy is still hitting the recruiting trail, and his coaches believe in the old school ways, if you will, there. And it all equaled a season that I think it was only the third 10-win season in Syracuse since 1992. So, I mean, man, it's a football town again.
We love to hear this, Brent. Okay, let's just start with the elephant in the room. As two Clemson alums, I mean, we just want to send just our absolute thank yous, flowers,
where you were going at first.
Everything up to Fran Brown at Syracuse. That was crazy. And we're going to get more into the Syracuse-Miami game, and we'll talk about that because that game was just wild. But I just want to get that out there, Brent, and just say all of South Carolina, well, not all because the Gamecocks, but most of South Carolina and Clemson fans really want to thank Syracuse. So thank you, Brent.
You're welcome. And, that's a return on the favor. Kelly, when I used to go on your old radio show, we used to talk about how, Syracuse would find ways to beat Clemson. And I think you were the jinx on that every time you'd bring it up. So we owed you one, right? So there you go for all those wins and those close games and everything that happened. We said, let's help out our friends. Let's help out Dabo. And, we'll be looking for a return on the favor at some point. But we were happy to help up here. And Fran and company were happy. But that was great. Dabo calling him out on the podium
Yeah.
and the back and forth. And I'm sure there'll be some fun conversations in the coaches' meetings. And
Right.
that was really cool to see. And
It,
that was
it
a
is
heck of a
funny.
game, too. That was a heck of
It was.
a ACC championship game. And the fact
Right.
that and that's another thing, guys. Like Syracuse fans were so into that because they felt like they had an ownership in
Right.
Sure.
high-level ACC football. And, I mean, they were like a game away from being in that championship game.
Right.
And they were a loss or two away, maybe probably only one loss, from being in the college football playoff. Like, that's how close they were.
Which is crazy to think about. And you bring up the relationship, KG, real quick about, Coach Fran Brown and Coach Sweeney. Just even at media day, I mean, we saw Fran Brown shooting around, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll give Dabo 40 right now, no problem." And for them to just kind of go back and forth all season from afar was really funny, Kelly.
Yeah, well, I had to get that out there, Brent, and just send our thanks. But on a more serious note, I remember having you on to talk about Fran Brown, to talk about this shift up there at Syracuse. And I remember how excited you were, and you got us excited. And you talked about all these games being sold out and just all the hype and excitement. And, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is great. Maybe they can get to 8 wins. Like if they could go 8-4, first year under Fran Brown, what a year. You win 10 games. It's just an incredible season. When did you first think, okay, this hype is real? Like, do you have a moment where you started to really believe that this could be a 10-win season?
Yeah, it was early in the year. It was when Syracuse played Georgia Tech. It's the second game of the season. And remember, that's when Fran really kind of, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Manipulate's a strong word, but coaches love to go at each other, right? And when Brent Key said, we're going to go up to Syracuse and from 12-4, they're going to get everything we have. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but Fran took that personally. He's like, what do you mean you're going to come up here and out tough us? And we're Northeast tough. And like, he just fueled that game and that team with that mentality. And Georgia Tech was good. They were ranked at the time, and Syracuse fans were looking for something because they had played Ohio the week prior. And it's like, okay, first big test, Georgia Tech. Kyle McCord made a throw in that game. Okay. And our friend Dane Brugler actually put this throw in a story he wrote about Kyle in his draft prospects. This is back in September, and now we'll see where that goes in terms of Kyle's conversations and NFL draft stuff. But I just remember this throw that he made, and I turned to my friend Mike McAllister, who was sitting next to me in the press box, and I won't swear even though this is a podcast, but I'll paraphrase what I said. I'm like, dude, that's an effing NFL throw right there. And I had not seen, no offense to Eric Dungy and some great quarterbacks that Syracuse has had in recent years. I mean, Tommy DeVito certainly didn't have the offensive line to succeed here, but had the talent. Ryan Nassib got drafted back in the day. There's been some good quarterback play here. I haven't seen a quarterback throw like that. So seeing that throw, I'm like, they've got a guy. They've got a quarterback, right? So that was the first moment I was like, look, if you've got a quarterback, you've got everything. Not did I say in that moment, like, they're going to win 10 games? No. But I felt really good about my 8-4 prediction in that moment, for sure. You got a quarterback, you got everything. I know it's like the simplest formula in football, but he showed in that moment. And there was a great moment in that game too, Kelly, where Kyle made a play and he came over and he spiked the ball on the sideline. And I mean, he could have got penalized for that, which he didn't. I was like, there's just something different about this guy. And we saw it all year to the point where he set the ACC single season passing record.
Yeah, it was truly remarkable. And, just to see, number one, the excitement when Kyle got there. And I remember when that happened, I'm like, whoa, hold on now. Because as you just said, if you have that guy, if you have that position taken care of, a lot of other things can get moved up really quickly and just the level of play from everybody. But, the fact that he then delivered, had one game where he was under 300 yards, had 2 games where he was over like 450. I mean, it's crazy to look at the production, and we'll dive into more of that. But I want to circle back on Coach Fran Brown and just the confidence that he would always push into Kyle McCord. And really the first couple of games of the season, I mean, it was like every question asked at halftime or quarter break, whatever, he's getting interviewed during the game. Why are you guys doing this, Kyle McCord? How are you guys at Kyle McCord? And he never, ever was not confident in him. And so when you have a guy like that, what did you, because we knew coming in there were tendencies, but now that you've seen kind of a full season of who Coach Fran Brown is, are you almost more excited for the years to come?
I think so in a way, but I think we've got to acknowledge like they kind of had a cheat code there because Fran Brown knew Kyle McCord, as he would call him, Little League Kyle. Like he's known this guy for years. Jeff Nixon knew Kyle McCord, so they got to bring in Kyle, design an offense around him from the minute he walked into campus, and there was already a built-in trust there. Years and years of trust, and knowing the families knew each other, the McCords and the Browns, their wives worked together at the same hospital, so you can't find that in the transfer portal with everybody, right? But they could with McCord. But it does make me more excited because Fran, what we hear time and time again, Mac, these players just connect with him. The recruits, transfers, you have one conversation with Fran Brown and they just feel a connection. And it's encouraging because, I think you get a little older and you start saying, oh, those young kids, they don't know how to work hard. And, back in my day. But what I'm encouraged by is these players want to be coached. They want discipline. They want somebody to bring the best out of them. And by Fran being blunt and honest, but also he gives them a plan, right? And it's about more than football. It is about, this is still a university, right? They are very hard on, you have to be in class and you sit in the front of the class. And if you're not in class, you're going to hear from this coaching staff. And these are paid professionals now in a way, right? Semi-pro football players, but you're still going to school. You're still going to be a part of this. There's an emphasis on community, getting out there in the community. And I don't mean, paid appearances, even though there are some of those these days in college football, but community service is important. Getting out there, showing yourself and connecting with the community. It all pays off on the field. And I'm not saying I can't quantify how many wins that equals, but it's all a process for Fran. And if he can do that with Kyle McCord, but right down to the last guy on the roster, that's pretty encouraging because there's going to be times when Syracuse got lucky this year because McCord went the distance. But when you do have to put the backup in, and there were some guys that got hurt on this team, if they're doing the same process that QB1 was doing, then it all pays off in the end.
Yeah. And I think it's also, fascinating what you just said there about the way Coach Brown can connect and how different he is. I reflect back, Kelly, on my recruiting trips and meeting Nick Saban and Philip Fulmer and, Coach Cutcliffe and Joe Pa and Jim Tressel, like all these guys. And then I met Dabo Sweeney and it was like, whoa, this is so different from everything else that I've experienced. It's something you want to be a part of. And I'm sure, KG, that's the same effect that Syracuse is having right now with Coach Brown.
Yeah, he stands out. He's different in a good way. And I think that's obviously paying off. Brent, when we look back at the season too, I think one of the games that really stood out to me was the win at UNLV. We talked about this schedule and it was an odd schedule for October where you didn't have a home game, right? And you had
second year in a row they didn't have a home game in October.
Yeah, which is crazy. And some tough games on that schedule. NC State ended up being not as tough, but then Pitt obviously ended up being tougher. But what did you learn about this team in the UNLV game? That game was wild.
It was wild, and I'll tell you what, I had the time of my life in Vegas, and not because it's Vegas. Although look, it was Vegas, I'm not going to lie, but there were so many Syracuse fans there from all over the country. It became a destination game. We had a little meetup with our Syracuse Sports Insider group, and I was thinking like 30 people would show up. We had like 150 people show up at this bar in the Venetian in Vegas, and we had a ball. And everywhere you walked in Vegas for those days leading up to the game, like every fifth person, it felt like was a Syracuse fan. It was great. They probably brought in about, I'd say 10,000 people to that game. The game itself, too, was absolutely wild. First quarter, Syracuse could not be stopped. Second quarter, and unfortunately, if there was one flaw on this team this year, it was special teams. Special teams was an issue for Syracuse, and we saw they made a change there. James Villano is no longer the special teams coordinator. As we speak, they have not hired somebody else to take that position. But UNLV blocked 2 punts, 4 touchdowns in that game, and the swings back and forth. And to me, look, the Miami game was huge, and what McCord did was legendary, and he'll never buy a drink in this town again because of it. But to me, Kelly, the moment of the season was when LaQuinn Allen got the ball in overtime and refused to go down. That play was unbelievable. I watch it and I say, how did he get in that end zone? Like the will of a football player, Mac, you know it, cannot be denied there. So there's a lot of great moments this year, but that's the one that's going to stand out to me, that's how they won that game. And we mentioned the Georgia Tech moment and why things were different and why I felt this team could win 10 games. That was the cherry on top of the sundae. After that, I felt like this team could accomplish everything they wanted to because LaQuinn Allen just would not be denied. And now he's in the draft process, and Mel Kiper Jr. the other day was actually praising him up and down pretty high. He's somebody I think is going to rise up the draft boards as we go here, and I think we're going to see in the National Football League next year. But that moment was special, and it capped off one of the wildest games I've ever been at. 44-41 overtime, and when UNLV blocked that second punt and ran it in for a touchdown, I mean, honestly, the last thing I'm thinking is we're going to see that kind of game, but it was wild. I mean, come on, Vegas. You can't have a boring game in that town, right? You got to roll the dice and let it go.
You got to deliver. And a lot of things that you just said there that I think was fantastic. But, looking at LaQuinn Allen kind of specifically for a moment, there was a time, I believe it maybe was the Virginia Tech game, maybe the Cal game, somewhere in between there towards the end of the season where, we're sitting around, watching games, Eddie, myself, and EJ Manuel, Taylor Tannenbaum, and we're just like, who is the best / most important player to this team? Like, is it Kyle McCord? Is it Aronde Gadsden? Is it, Pena? Or is it LaQuinn Allen? And the two of them really think Allen is the glue that just made so many things go. Now, I'm a quarterback guy. I know what the difference is when you have a good one and a bad one. But when you have a running back that can do the things he did, especially in the passing game, and you can be so multidimensional, he was really fun to watch. This is a loaded draft class. It's going to be fascinating to see kind of where he goes, but wherever he goes, it's going to be a steal, and they're going to have a fantastic player. So I'm really excited to kind of see that. We're talking about the season and the UNLV game of how important that was. Pitt was an anomaly. I mean, it was such a weird, dumb game. I don't even think we really waste time talking about it, but I do want to focus on after that and the loss in November to Boston College there. So it's two pretty close. And I'm like, here we go. This is what Syracuse does. They get halfway through the season.
I told KG believe. I believe.
I didn't believe because I've seen it for 6 years.
Callie was on the run.
For 6 years. And I just knew. I was like, here we go. If people are going to start getting hurt, the depth is going to show up and nothing's going to happen. And the complete opposite. I mean, this team really came together. I think you saw Kyle take another step. You saw all these guys. I mean, everybody just continued to step up. That was really cool. What does that say to you, the way this team finished on a 4-game win streak?
That's one of the most important things I think that Fran Brown came in and hopefully changed the narrative on, because for so long, and it wasn't just in the Dino era, it went before that, but it was mostly the Dino era. This team would just fade in November. They had a poor record in November. They would, like you said, every team gets hurt in college football, but that proves your depth, right? Syracuse had some guys get hurt that weren't 100%. LaQuinn Allen was one of them, by the way. That guy was banged up and still going out there and doing what he did and being one of the great dual threat guys in college football. So to prove that you can get down to that second layer, the offensive line, and this was intentional, Mac. They rotated a lot of guys in and out of the offensive and defensive lines for that purpose. If they got in November and, you don't want your second or third string defensive tackle, like, what, you want me to play? I've been out there for 8 games. Like, they were used to being out there. So that strategy paid off in that down the stretch in the month of November. So now you've erased that narrative, because I said it when they lost to Boston. Like, here we go. Like, yeah. I've seen this movie before, Syracuse football in November, but it goes back to what we said about the quarterback. Look at Syracuse's 3 losses, okay? Stanford won on the last play of the game, and Kyle McCord didn't have a chance to counter it, okay? Pitt, I'm not saying Pitt was stealing signals, guys, but they sure knew that game plan.
Interesting.
I think Pitt picked up on some signals in that game. Okay, which good for them. Good. If Syracuse is giving it away, then, hey, man, it's like in baseball. If I steal your signs, that's your fault. It's not my fault, okay?
That's a fact.
Especially now that you have helmet communication, right?
Yes. Well, yeah. I don't know about that. But
they did it work?
They knew where Kyle McCord was throwing the ball before
Interesting.
he did.
Okay.
It's a little weird.
Hey, they knew before Kyle knew.
Yeah, it's a little weird. And then Boston College, again, that was a defensive game. That defense had a bad day, right? So 2 out of your 3 losses you can't put on your quarterback. You get one of those games back, you're in the college football playoff. That's how close they are.
Think about. Crazy.
So that's great. So that's all year. That's beginning, middle, and end of the year. But the fact that they were able to take that November narrative and just wipe it away was critical.
It was huge. And still the Stanford loss. I mean, I remember watching that game. It was a Friday night game, right? And it was the only game of the year where Ashton Daniels looked unbelievable.
Right. Yes.
And I'm thinking, oh, Stanford. And then they just disappear. So, but that's college football. Sometimes you have situations like that, and that's what makes the sport so fun. So you mentioned the November. Let's talk about the Miami game. Brent, so we talk about how I believed. Obviously, maybe I'm the only one here. I was saying, okay, November's going to be fine. However, Mac was much more, and I think it was because Mac was more wishful thinking. He was like, oh, Syracuse is going to beat Miami. And I'm like, Mac, I don't see this. I don't really see it happening.
It was just the ACC thing to happen. It was the perfect ACC thing.
I just felt, I know Miami had been flying so close to the sun, like they had been doing that all year. But I felt, and then when the game started, Miami goes up, what, 14-0? I'm like, oh, this game's
21.
21-0. I'm like, yeah, Mac, ha, ha, ha. What happened, Brent? Walk us through your vantage point of that Syracuse-Miami game.
Yeah, it's 21-0, and I can't remember a Syracuse football game. One of the games you could go back to that had that much hype was the last time Miami came in, when Gino Toretta was capping off a Heisman campaign, and Miami, I believe, was #1 in the country at the time, and that was the U when they were the U, man, early 90s, and Syracuse had a great team that year. Marvin Graves at quarterback, and that, I believe they were in the top 5 in the country, and they came 3 yards away from beating that team and knocking them off. So Cam Ward, Kyle McCord, all the hype, everything, and they're down 21-0, right? And the dome just deflates. And I know this sounds so after the fact, guys, but I'm talking to my colleagues around me, the great Emily Leiker, who's now covering the Minnesota Vikings in Minneapolis. Shout out to Emily, and Chris Carlson. And I said, guys, I know this sounds simple, but they have 6. They have 6. 6 can get them out of this. And we saw Kyle McCord do it. We saw this team change. We saw them adjust, and we saw the best thing that could happen in that game, and we said it going in, was a shootout, because Miami's defense obviously was not up to par. Cam Ward was him, and Kyle McCord was him too. And while they weren't necessarily, I always love those quarterback hype matchups, because they're not necessarily going up against each other, but it all comes down to the quarterback, right? I'm like, they have 6, and Miami's defense isn't good. And then that just turned into the greatest comeback Syracuse football has ever had. It turned into one of the great games in the history of the Dome. And from the beginning of the season, when I said it, to the end of the season, when he reassured it, and then did it again in the bowl game, by the way. He had the best performance of anybody in a bowl game, short of somebody going off in the national championship game, which is not taking place as we speak. When you've got that quarterback, you're in it. You have that chance. I don't know if I would have had that belief had I not seen Kyle McCord pull that off a bit. And all year long, they'd had gotten off to slow starts. That was actually an issue for Syracuse. I'm like, well, one more time? Can they dig themselves out of a hole and at least make this a game? And they did more than that. They made it the best comeback they've ever had. It was incredible.
It's just a team that likes to entertain. I understand. I've been a part of those. You just want to give the people what they want. And I think it also helps that these receivers stepped up immensely. I mean, I know you got a guy that can get it to him, but I mean, we're talking about right there, potentially 3 1,000-yard receivers, which is crazy, one of which being a tight end. And then you've got 2 guys right behind them, each with 500 yards, one of those being a running back. So, I mean, the weapons were amazing to kind of see that. Let's pivot really quickly just to look at 25. And we were kind of joking.
Let me jump in real quick. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a guy that needs a shout out for, because you just said it.
Come on.
Jackson Meeks had an amazing game against Miami.
Here's
a guy who transfers from Georgia. He was mostly special teams at Georgia, came with Fran Brown. Fran Brown believed in him, saw the talent, and Zeed Haynes came along with Jackson Meeks, and the guy we heard about all through camp was Zeed Haynes, who unfortunately had some personal issues and didn't play most of the season, right? So Jackson Meeks steps up, becomes a 1,000-yard receiver. And I was going through some stuff the other day, and I was writing a story about Jackson Meeks because he's one of 6 Syracuse players in the Shrine Bowl, which is tied for the most in the country with Colorado, by the way.
Wow.
And there's this picture of Jackson Meeks just flying through the air and catching a Kyle McCord pass. And that's the moment that stands out to me from that Miami game. I think he had like 110 yards and 2 touchdowns. It could be more. I might be off there. But he had a huge game against Miami. And as good as 6 was, every quarterback needs that go-to guy. And as the season evolved, Jackson Meeks became that guy. As good as OG is and Trevor Pena is, and like you said, the fleet of receivers that Syracuse had, Jackson Meeks was one of the main reasons Syracuse won that game, and he deserves a shout-out for that.
Yeah, love that, Brent. And Pena's coming back too, right?
He is.
Yeah, that's big. What was the key? I'm going to ask you this, Brent, then I have to just head out quickly. Mac's going to finish it. But what was the key for him? Because it almost felt like he came out of nowhere. I know he had a decent year, 2 years prior? But tell me more about his evolution.
Trevor, what we heard all of last season from the coaching staff, the season prior to Fran coming in, was, man, if Trevor was healthy, you guys would see. Like, coaches were telling us this left and right. Players were telling us this left and right. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. And the guy that I relate Trevor Pena to is Khalil Shakur. It's just possession receiver, get him the ball, just get him the ball and let him just video game wiggle his way through the defense.
Yeah.
Meeks became the top target, but there was certainly a connection between McCord and Pena. When Trevor Pena was the safety valve. Okay, when McCord would drop back, maybe there was some pressure and had to get rid of the ball. You always knew that Trevor Pena would be there. So let me put it to you this way, Kelly. When Fran Brown there was a fan event before the bowl game, he announced at that event that Trevor Pena was coming back. Not only did he say that, in that moment, he said he's a captain next year.
Right.
So that's how important he is, and that's the kind of player he can be when he's healthy. When he was banged up, they really missed him, and he became such an important, I'll say it again, safety valve in that offense. That was the biggest role he could play. Next year, it's going to be even bigger.
It really will be, and that's what's going to be so fun to watch. And, just, again, speaking of next year and looking at what this team's going to be. And again, I was joking with you. I said it's a murderer's row, but it is. I mean, this schedule is brutal. Let's just look at the schedule. We don't know timing yet on when you play these guys, but you play Tennessee, playoff team, Clemson, playoff team, SMU, playoff team, Notre Dame in the freaking national championship. Oh, by the way, 10-win Miami, 9-win Duke. This schedule is nuts. So I guess just kind of brief expectation, and then maybe we dive in on who you expect to be, kind of playmakers for next season.
Mac, let me add to that, because Tennessee is in Atlanta, Notre Dame, SMU, Clemson, Miami, all on the road. Okay?
We'll
see how the schedule lays out.
Welcome to the ACC.
And let's be honest here. Of those teams, everybody goes through attrition and, maybe you're not as good as you were the prior year. But of those teams I just rattled off, who's going to be down? Right? Notre Dame's going to be good. SMU, they're all going to be good. Okay? Miami just went and got Carson Beck. They're going to be fine.
Unreal.
The home slate, okay? Duke was 9-3 last year. Bill Belichick and Carolina are coming to the Dome. We'll see what kind of team he puts together. And Pitt and Boston College, who beat Syracuse last year. Like, that schedule is, by the way, they play UConn in non-conference. UConn was 9-4. Good team. Yeah. So good old Colgate's coming up for a game at the Domes after that.
Thank God we got toothpaste on the schedule. You
said it, murderer's row. And by the way, they need a quarterback because Kyle McCord flirted with coming back. Would he get the waiver? Would he not? He's moved on. He's going to the NFL. So you got a good old-fashioned quarterback competition, Mac, and that's where the conversation about next year starts. So you got a few candidates. Syracuse brought Ricky Collins Jr. in from LSU. Highly touted guy, all the accolades you would want, Elite 11 guy, the numbers, the whole thing, just doesn't have any experience. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. Can he win the job? I would give him the slight edge at this point. Michael Johnson Jr. comes back. He was the backup quarterback for Syracuse last year. Played at Penn State, played at, I believe, FIU for a little bit. He actually transitioned out of being a quarterback, comes back to Syracuse. His dad is Michael Johnson Sr., who's one of the offensive coaches for the Orange, and won the backup quarterback job. But Kyle McCord played every snap but 6 at quarterback last season.
Isn't that crazy?
So that's nuts. So your guess is as good as mine on what Michael Johnson Jr. can do. Jakari Williams is back on the roster, who was actually a Dino Babers recruit who they held over. I like what I see from Jakari at practice, but if I'm going to sit here and tell you that, oh yeah, he's got the job next year, I'd be lying to you. I just have not seen enough of him in game scenarios. So I think that given how hard they went after Ricky Collins Jr., how much they wanted him, ideally it would have been McCord for one more year. He kind of learns under him and they transition, but he's got every opportunity to win the job now. And Mac, I'm going to give you a name to look out for in the future. He's not going to win the job this year because I think it's just really hard for a freshman to come in and do it. Luke Carney. Luke Carney is one of Syracuse's quarterback commits. He is the only quarterback in the history of the state of Texas to win 4 state titles. Over 10,000 yards passing, dual threat guy, can get out of the pocket. Now, Luke came from kind of a smaller private league in Texas. So I think some people look at those state titles and say, it's not Texas high school football as we know it. Right. But I've talked to a bunch of people down there that said if Luke Carney was playing in some of those higher profile public leagues, if you will, he would have held his own and would have got much higher star ratings in the whole thing. So I don't think Luke can win the job right out of the gate. That's a little hard to ask a freshman to do, but he's the quarterback of the future at Syracuse.
Yeah, come on, man. That's exciting and some great insight. Appreciate that kind of into the room. And just as we close, though, we mentioned the murder's row. We mentioned the quarterback. There are pieces everywhere that I think a lot of people are excited about. There's a lot of young guys that now taking that next step, freshman to sophomore, sophomore to junior, that will be elite and will be big-time leaders. What is expectation with that schedule, with year 2, where fans can, don't be mad. I know we won 10. We're not winning 10 probably this year. What's the number that you kind of, want expectations to be that's still good? I hope people really, this is like Georgia Tech all those years where they have to play Georgia and Clemson every year. That's the type of caliber schedule that we're dealing with right here.
I think fans are realistic, Mac. I've been hearing from them. They look at the schedule, they look at the quarterback situation, and everybody kind of takes a deep breath and says, man, if they can win 6 or 7 games with that schedule, develop, show you can hang with these teams. The scores of those games are important. We mentioned all those road games that they have to go on. I think fans just want to see Syracuse hold their own with these teams, but realize 10 wins with that schedule is, if they do it, man, make Fran Brown the highest paid coach in college football, because that's incredible, right? But I think people point and say 6 or 7 wins, get back to a bowl game, show you're making progress, and then key for year 3 in the Fran Brown era. Because what he did this year was an anomaly in so many ways. You have the portal and you have some advantages built in, and he set the bar. And it's funny, Mac, because when Fran was at his Holiday Bowl press conference, I know he wasn't trying to insult the fine people at the Holiday Bowl, but he's like, man, I want to be playing next week. It's great to be here. Everybody's treating us well. He's like, I want to play next week. Yeah. Fran's not having any of this. When you ask Fran Brown this question, when I ask Fran Brown this question, there's no way he's going to be like, oh, man, if we win 6 games next year, we'll be fine. He has set the bar that high, which is great. But the rest of us over here in Planet Reality are like, well, Fran, that schedule, man, if you're getting 7 wins, take the win. Take the win if you can get 6 or 7 wins in that brutal schedule. I've never seen anything like that. For all those games to end up on the road is insane.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So we'll see. I actually have one more for you that I am fascinated with. Is Syracuse done in the portal? We'll have another window come in. Are there a couple, other position needs that maybe they like, or are there some other high school guys maybe coming in the summer that can fill some of those spots?
I don't think they're done, but they're certainly not being as aggressive as they were last year. And you're completely gutting and rebuilding a roster with a coaching change. So you kind of expected that, but Mac, just looking at the numbers here, they only brought in 7 guys into the portal. One of them being Fran Brown Jr., by the way.
Come on.
Fran's son. He was at St. Francis last year. But the position they really need is secondary, because the players they lost in the secondary, just looking at a couple of key guys, Marcellus Barnes Jr., highly touted, one of their higher rated recruits, played 5 games last year, did deal with a little bit of back issue He transfers out to SMU, and they'll face him next year in Dallas. Jaden Gould and Jaden Bellamy both transferred to Central Florida together. So there's some holes in the secondary. Now, Deuce Chestnut announced this week that he's coming back, which is good for Syracuse because they need all the depth and experience they can get. So I think they're keeping a keen eye on the secondary. And then you got to keep an eye on the portal. Like, Let me give you just a scenario here. Deion Sanders takes an NFL job. Caden Salter transferred their quarterback. Syracuse was high on Caden Salter. They brought him in here, and I know Fran wanted him. So if a guy like that ends up in the portal, you go and get him, right? Just who do you have relationships with? Who do you know
For sure.
from recruiting, not only in the portal, but traditional recruiting, that you can always add a guy. And what's fascinating about this conversation, as you know, Mac, is when the roster limits go up to 105. But I mentioned it too. Syracuse brought in the most recruits in the country last year. So, as the kids say, the math ain't mathin' with the roster. I'm going to be curious how they shift some things around and who could still come and go. And you mentioned the spring portal window. So I don't think they're done by any stretch. But the interesting thing is they have not been as aggressive as they were last year. They brought 7 in, 9 went out. So they're sitting pretty good.
Yeah, which is a good thing, though. I mean, that's where – my perfect world is, you're only bringing in what you lose, and you don't want to lose a lot. So, if you can keep that, rely and build that machine, that's not a bad thing, because that means you're not missing on a bunch of guys and you're keeping a bulk of your stars. Speaking of stars, Axeman, you're the best. Thank you so much for joining us. This was always such a pleasure to talk with you. Great insight on Syracuse, and excited to see what they can do next year, because it's going to be tough.
Thanks for having me, Mac. I love coming on with you guys. Always a good time. And yeah, things are exciting around here. Maybe we can get that basketball team to wake up a little bit for the next couple of months, but it's a football town now.
Thanks again to Brent Axe for joining us here on the podcast today. We've got quite a few more after further reviews coming at you next week, so stay tuned. We're going to be visiting the Triangle and talking about a few teams in that area. Some overachieved, some underachieved. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So we will get to that. But again, thank you to Ingles for presenting this show. Thank you to Roback. Use our code GMPOD. And we hope that you enjoyed this insight from Brent Axe. We had a lot of fun talking with him about the Syracuse Orange. Intrigued by what they do next year, especially with that schedule. If you missed our schedule release show, go check it out. We just put it out yesterday, and you can go see our reaction to all that's going on with the ACC schedules for 2025. But until next time, we'll see y'all.